Hello, my name's Bond, Richard Bond, and this is Curmudgeonly Yours, a show on Society Bites Radio, part of the Radio Ear Network family, supplying social interaction for the mind and soul. The introductory and concluding music to this show is La Polonaise by Wieniawski, played by Max Bond. I am your host and curmudgeon, where everything is what it seems. Nothing is what it seems. And what is not said is often of most interest. Today, my guest is writer John Vespasian, who is going to talk to us about his latest book, Asymmetry, The Shortcut to Success When Success Seems Impossible. Hello, John Vespasian.
Hi, Richard. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, thank you. Welcome to Curmudgeonly Yours, an eclectic current events show on Society Bites Radio, which is part of the Radio Ear Network family. I had John on before last year. He's the author, a prolific author of 11 books about rational living, including When Everything Fails, Try This, in 2009, Rationality is the Way to Happiness, 2009, The Philosophy of Builders, 2010, The 10 Principles of Rational Living, 2012, Rational Living, Rational Working, in 2013, Consistency, the Key to Permanent Stress Relief, 2014, On Becoming Unbreakable, 2015, Thriving in Difficult Times, 2016, Sequentiality, the Amazing Power of Finding the Right Sequence of Steps, 2017, Undisrupted, How Highly Effective People Deal with Disruptions, in 2019, and finally his latest book, Asymmetry, The Shortcut to Success When Success Seems Impossible, now in 2020. John Vespasian has lived in Germany, Italy, France, Spain, and the Netherlands. His books combine his passion for history, investing, and personal development, reflecting his philosophy of rational living, productiveness, and respect for the individual. The purpose of my work is to draw practical lessons from history, he explains. If you want to make good decisions, you have to look at the big picture and learn from the wisdom accumulated in centuries of human experience. Knowledge is the only valid response to stress, the only formula that can make you more effective, Vespasian argues. My books contain the wisdom I have accumulated in decades of research. It's all about learning from other people's successes and mistakes and figuring out how to apply those principles to your own life. In every book, I go through biographies and historical events with the goal of extracting from them lessons we can use right now. So this book is called Asymmetry, The Shortcut to Success When Success Seems Impossible. John, can you explain, if you have not yet attained the desired results in your life, can you explain that this book is really for you, the reader? If you want to find shortcuts to achieving more with less effort, this book will teach you how a disoriented man like Philip Neri became extraordinarily successful. Let's say, who is Philip Neri and how did he become extraordinarily successful?
Yeah, this is a very interesting story from history. Neri is a very popular saint in Italy and in part of the United States. He's a Catholic saint from the 16th century. And I found the biography very intriguing because he was trying different approaches. He was trying to become a religious leader for decades. He tried many different schemes. He created a charity and he was trying to raise money. And it was a complete failure. And then he started also a congregation to take care of sick people, and it was also a failure. Mm-hmm. And eventually he was almost giving up all his ambitions to become a religious leader. And he found a solution that was completely asymmetric. And this is how I started with the idea for the book, because he found a way to use resources that nobody was using. It was a completely asymmetric approach in the sense that when people are trying to become successful in any area, I mean, Neri was a religious person, so he was very interested in religion, but the approach is the same if you're running a business or you're trying to develop any skill or to try to grow in any area. So what Neri did was first to try to compete with everybody else, and he failed because there were a lot of charities, there were a lot of congregation already in Rome. And eventually he realized that nobody was using the churches during the week. From Monday to basically to Saturday, they were completely empty. And he thought, maybe I could do something that nobody else is doing. So he started to organize traveling, actually he called it pilgrimage, sermons on Saturdays and during the week on the evening. So he would preach every evening in a different church. On Saturdays, he organized sort of walking tours in Rome from church to church. He attracted hundreds of people within a few weeks. And after a couple of years, he was extremely famous. People actually went to Rome just to participate in these activities from Philip Neri. And he took advantage of resources that were completely free of charge. The churches were empty. Nobody was using them during the week. Nobody was using them on Saturday morning. And he created actually a movement. Eventually, he became a very influential person within the Catholic Church. And this is the kind of stories I'm telling in the book. People who try to compete head-on in different markets, in different skills, in different areas of their lives, and they fail because there is too much competition. They cannot really get ahead. And sometimes, after a lot of failure, they find an asymmetric strategy, and this is what I explore in the book in different centuries, different professions, different areas, that allows them to win, apparently with very little effort. Because once you find an asymmetric strategy, you can cut through years of energy and years of effort very, very, very quickly.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you. What do you mean by asymmetric? Why is it asymmetric? Symmetry implies that there are two parallel things, and the asymmetric, you use one rather than the other. What is it? What does it mean?
Well, asymmetric, in the sense I use in the book, is basically doing something that is not linear. So, for instance, I mean, if you want to run a business, you have, imagine you're running a retail operation. What most people do is to compete on price. They have the same products, they compete on price, they compete on the advertising, but basically it's the same approach. So it's completely symmetric, it's completely linear. People who actually develop very profitable retail operations, and I go into details. For instance, in the book, I present the biography of Marshall Field, who was a very famous department store operator at the beginning of the 20th century. And he was trying to become successful as a retail operator for decades by competing, by doing the same thing that everybody else was doing. And eventually he succeeded by taking a completely asymmetric approach. He closed a lot of locations because they were barely profitable. He concentrated on doing only high-end sales. He improved his products. He created unconditional refunds, the first time in history.
Okay.
And he attracted only a small segment of the market, but it was the most profitable. So this is the kind of stories I tell in the book. And I can tell you that the most difficult thing very often is not to find the asymmetric approach, is to actually to discard what you are doing, because people want to work very hard. They want to put in more hours. They want to prove that they are very ambitious. But until you realize that a symmetric approach is very unlikely to succeed, you can keep on wasting your time for decades without getting anywhere.
Got it. Philip Neri did bring a lot of money to the church, though, didn't he? They must have charged him money to use the church during the week when it was empty.
Eventually, he created his own congregation, which is called the Oratorians, and he eventually built his own churches. because at the end, I mean, he had thousands and thousands of sponsors, very wealthy people. But at the beginning, he was doing everything free of charge.
Okay. Now, I'm going to go on to your certain questions I have for you, but I wanted to ask you about, you wrote about Mozart. You say what Mozart should have done to grow wealthy instead of working himself to death. Now, we all think of Mozart as this fabulous musician that we listen to all the time, but during his lifetime, you say he worked himself to death. Could you go into that a bit?
Yeah, Mozart died at a very young age. Huh? He was working 18 hours a day for decades.
Mm-hmm.
A brilliant musician, a brilliant composer. He was also an entrepreneur because he staged his own concerts, he sold tickets, he gave music lessons. I mean, he did everything. But he made a very irregular income. He was all the time trying to pay his debt and never really made any money. So in the end, he just, he died from a virus. Now that we are in this virus environment, he died very young from an infection. And the problem is that the guy was a genius, but he couldn't concentrate on a profitable niche because he was doing activities like, teaching music to beginners, where he made very little money, but he was reluctant to give up any activities because he was always afraid of losing the income. Eventually, and this is the thesis from this chapter, that Mozart only started to make money when he started to write operas. Because operas was actually the big business in the 18th century. It was really where actually you had hundreds and hundreds of people going there. It was a repetitive business because you had many performances.
Sure.
And Mozart was wasting his time writing requiems for a burial that were performed only once.
That's
he
true.
wrote a piece of music. But it is when you look at it on perspective, it's crazy. But he was doing this for years. And the problem is that he was a genius. He wanted to do everything because he was able to do everything. Yeah. And the only thing that actually made money, huge amount of money, was the opera. And for the opera, he had to work with someone else. He eventually found a Latin professor in Italy. His name was De Ponte, and he wrote the lyrics for the operas because Mozart could not write in Italian; had to be written in Italian. So eventually, they teamed up together. And they wrote very successful operas, but Mozart continued to waste his time doing everything that didn't make money. So he was running around like crazy, and eventually he collapsed. If he had concentrated on the operas, he would have eventually lived maybe 20 years longer, made a fortune, as he deserved, instead of running around. So the problem is it's very difficult to give up the symmetric approach because if you are a genius and you can do 20 things, you have the tendency to do 20 things because Mozart was also a great performer. But when you are doing opera, you are not performing. You're just writing and basically doing management, but you are not, usually you're not performing the music yourself. For Mozart, it was very hard because he could actually do everything. He could perform, he could write, and when he died, when he actually died the last week, he was writing a completely negligible piece of music just to pay the rent. So it's a tragic story. But what I try to do in the book is to prevent people from making this kind of mistake, which is very, very frequent.
That's right. Now you say this book, your book, Asymmetry, presents practical lessons for finding shortcuts to a better life, solid strategies to bring your results to a higher level. So let's go in. Why does the book sustain that fast progress will often depend on broken lines? I'm not sure what you mean by that. Go ahead.
Yeah, this idea is actually not self-evident because when you look at the stories, biographies from different people, you see that most of them, they only adopt an asymmetric approach after they fail in a linear approach. They try to do everything linear, to compete head-to-head, to work longer hours, and they do it sometimes for years and years. And eventually something breaks because they cannot take it anymore. This is too hard. They fail. They are completely despair. And then they change. And they start to look for an asymmetric approach, which is what I call a broken line.